Hi everyone, it's James here. Welcome to another installment of Revisiting, where I look back on one particular album that has some special significance for me. And today I'm really chuffed to welcome back to the channel for, I think, the third time, Mr. Jamie Sefton. Hi Jamie, how are you doing?
Hello. Hi, Jim. Good to be here again. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, well, thanks for coming along. So, this is a video I know you've been wanting to do for a long time,
Mm,
and I suppose it's quite sad that we're doing it really now because of the recent passing of Richard Tandy. But it was his passing really that made me finally think, yeah, now's the time to do Time
yeah.
by
Yeah.
ELO.
It is a shame. Obviously,
Yeah.
it's sad because Tandy's keyboards and synths are all over this album. I mean, it's a major work by him, and
Yeah.
obviously Jeff Lynne as well has a bit to do with it.
Let's just quickly talk about our own personal history with it, and then we'll move on and talk about the music and talk about some of the history of the record. So, where did you first, or when did you first encounter this album? It came out in 1981, didn't it? So,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
working out, you'd have been presumably 12 years old when this came out.
Yeah, yeah, and it had a major kind of impact on me.
Mm.
I remember hearing, I think it was on Radio One. I think Gary Davis of all people had like said, "Oh, there's this great new album coming out from ELO, Time," and I was like, "Oh my God, there's a new ELO album, brilliant!"
Mm.
So I remember going into town, into York, to buy it with my mum, and I bought Time and brought it back, and I had my dad's old sort of 70s stereo in the corner, and I was listening to it on big kind of 70s cans, and it just blew me away. I just thought, wow, it's so good. I mean, it sounded amazing. I think the production on it is
Mm.
fantastic. I think Jeff Lynne has done an amazing job. It sounds huge, but also I think the mix of sort of electronic instruments and an
Mm.
orchestra and the kind of little interstitial bits in between the tracks and the backward stuff and the effects and vocoder and all that. I just thought it was a brilliant piece of work, and it really hung together, and it created a whole world. We've talked about this before. We've done Beatles stuff like this, where we talk about albums that create pictures in your mind, like
Mm.
Sergeant Pepper's, and this created a kind of whole world in my mind of this futuristic world where this person or people were kind of living in and thinking, looking back at the time I was in the early 80s and thinking, wow, I wish I
Mhm.
was there with real flowers and and
Yeah.
it kind of got my imagination. I was really into kind of sci-fi and rockets and time travel and all that kind of stuff. So it just hit perfectly. It's like, wow, a sci-fi ELO album, brilliant.
The thing is, they'd had that association with sci-fi anyway, hadn't they, back through into the 70s with the big spaceship album covers.
Of
And
course, yeah, of course.
in 1978 they'd done the spaceship tour, and that was round about the time of Close Encounters, I think. So they'd really
Mm, mm.
ridden the zeitgeist, I think, as far as sci-fi was concerned. I didn't hear the record until a few years later, funnily enough. I didn't even know about it until 1986
Oh wow.
when Balance of Power came out. I had totally lost sight of ELO. I'd heard nothing by them since Discovery, and I just discovered the album in a record shop called Cobb Records in North Wales, and
Oh
it
yeah,
was
I've been there. It's great.
great. Yeah, great shop. Yeah. And I brought home with me on that particular haul, I brought home a copy of Time, Secret Messages, and Face the Music, those three
Oh
records all
wow.
together. So that was
Mm.
pretty mind-blowing. I think of the three of them, I think Time clearly was the one that was the most overtly, mind-blowing.
For me, it really kind of it was like, wow, this is completely different. And just as a concept album, it's just
Mm.
it just hangs together really well. And concept album in sort of 1981, it sort of goes against the sort of what's happening, but in a strange way, is also very much part of, if I use the term, that the time, because there's a lot of stuff about J.G. Ballard, and Crash was a big influence on bands at the time. You got John Fox writing about Underpass and OMD Electricity, and you've got like the Buggles all talking about the future, and it was very much that kind of things were changing, computers were coming in,
Mm.
um the instruments were changing, the technology for making music was changing dramatically, samplers and a new synth technology was coming in, So it was part of, like, it was all in the kind of zeitgeist and the kind of the water of the time, of this kind of move towards the future and computers. Very much part of that, that period, I think.
I guess we should just do a small bit of history here and just say that
Mm,
ELO essentially peaked, commercially with Out of the Blue in 1977, and there was this huge spaceship tour in 1978. And from what I've read over the years, Jeff Lynne was tied to a contract. He had to do a certain number of ELO albums. And I think, as far as he was concerned, Out of the Blue was really the pinnacle. And as
mm,
far as that particular sound was concerned, the big, huge orchestrations, concerto for a rainy day and the choirs and
mm,
everything.
mm,
And I think he probably saw which way the wind was blowing. And I think time probably was a bit of a contractual obligation for him. And what always amazes me is that, given that that's the case, how amazing it was that he um, decided to embrace all this technology, because I don't think it came naturally to him. He wasn't, Jeff Lynne is not the kind of person you think of. He's not Trevor Horn. He's not somebody
no,
necessarily who's ahead of the curve in that sense. He was a huge fan of the Beatles. He loved analog and all those ELO albums. It's amazing that, given that he wasn't really into doing ELO anymore, how amazing is it? He could have just knocked out another kind of tired sounding Discovery clone. The expertise on this record, the amount of amazing sound manipulation, it's incredible, isn't it, that he actually
mm.
embraced it to that extent.
So weird, this album. It's like, I think ELO fans, anybody who's watching this will know Time, but it's very much a kind of forgotten album.
Yeah.
I just want to say a little bit about this magazine, Electronic Sound, which is a brilliant mag, by the way. If you're
Mm,
into your kind of electronic and strange music, this month, coincidentally, they've got an issue that's all about 1981, and they've got the 101 records of 1981, and there's some incredible records in there. There's a Human League, and there's the Kraftwerk, which I mentioned, New Order, Joy Division, Depeche Mode. This it's a really fantastic era of music. I think 81. It's that crossover. It's that post-punk,
mm.
new wave, just going to electronic stuff. Duran Duran. The kind of beginning of all that kind of stuff, and some really fantastic stuff. But of course, Time isn't in it.
Oh no, I thought you were going to say it was the number one.
I've met the guys who make the mag, and they're lovely people. So I put a message out, and I just said, look, I love the 101 records, but I would make an argument for an album to be included from a band that have never been seen as cool. You're
Mm,
never going to have Joy Division, and then, oh, we've got ELO in there as well. Time by ELO, and I said it influenced Flaming Lips, Daft Punk. It
mm,
was sampled by Future Sound of London. I've heard samples of it. I think it's very underrated. I say it's a very underrated futuristic synth prog pop album.
mm.
And bless him, the editor is called Push, and he got back to me and he said, these are his words. Damn, there's always one or two that you forget about when you put together lists like this until someone points out your glaring omission. Obviously, as ELO fans, we stick it in there. But I think it does get overlooked a lot. And I
Mm.
think that's a shame. And I think it's due for a sort of reassessment. And I did read like a review that was done quite recently where they say, well, this album's pretty bloody good, isn't it? And it's
Mm.
like, it's nice to read some sort of new people getting into it and say, wow, this album's really good. But it is a kind of bit forgotten.
The glaring elephant in the room that we haven't mentioned yet is the Xanadu movie, which had come
Mm,
out, I think, in 1980, the previous year. And I think that album or that soundtrack or whatever really did cause ELO to fall off the critical radar in a big way. I think it was a
mm,
dreadful film. I mean, the soundtrack, the Jeff Lynne side of the record, at least, I thought was really good, but it was very fluffy, it was very commercial.
yeah.
And I think they'd ridden that wave of sort of Bee Gees, Saturday Night Fever,
Disco had just kind of
disco,
fallen
just
off a
things.
cliff,
Yeah.
hadn't it, really,
Fallen
at
off a
that
cliff.
point?
I mean, the Bee Gees totally fell off a cliff in the 80s as well.
Yeah.
I was 15 when I heard this album, and I took it
Mm,
into school because I used to do that all the time. You take records into school.
mm,
And a friend of mine, or a friend of a friend actually, he saw it and said, "Oh, I love that album." And we started to pass it around. And for a while in my class at school, all these 15-year-old lads, this was in 1986, So again, it was, ELO were
Yeah,
not flavor of the month, but we all started
yeah.
passing it around, and people were coming into school having listened to it, and they were all going, "This is fantastic." It's strange. It's unfortunate. I think I just don't think that ELO or Jeff Lynne managed to shake off the just that uncool thing. Jeff Lynne, I don't think at this point was that interested in promoting the brand or the band or whatever. Secret Messages, the album after, was less good, and then there was a long sabbatical, and I don't think Jeff himself made much effort over the years to champion his eighties work. And like you say, he doesn't really play the songs now in the set. This album, it's not very, how should I put it? It's not very restrained, should we say? It's kind of like
Mm,
it takes the synth thing and it really blows it over the top, and just it's
mm.
huge, isn't
It
it?
is really over the top, isn't it? It's really
Yeah,
kind of extreme. I mean, it's great. I love it, but it's like it's
yeah,
really kind of its time and kind of over the top. There are bits of it, like you say, that are kind of, like the beginning of Here Is the News, like the da-na-na-na-na,
yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's really kind of, but it's great, it's kind of, it's a fantastic riff, and I think there's some really great synth sounds in there.
I think Jeff Lynne probably just OD'd on it. I think he probably just took it too far in the studio. I mean, when you listen to the record, and we should get into the tracks, I suppose,
Yeah, yeah.
um, it's very difficult when listening to the album to detect or to hear many moments where there's not some sort of technological intervention going on, shall
Whiz
we
bang
say.
going on,
Whiz
yeah.
bang. Even when you think that there's a vocal where you think, oh, there's like a passage of vocal there which is not drenched in whatever reverb, echo, and then you listen more closely and you go, oh no, at the end of every line it's kind of going and doing something,
Yeah,
or there's
yeah.
like a just like a spot effect on that word or this word. I mean, it's just, I can't imagine just the time and the effort and the just the sheer yeah, I mean, just the sheer time it would have taken in the studio to manipulate. It's that, isn't it? It's sound
Yeah.
manipulation. I don't know anything
Mm,
about this
mm.
stuff. I mean, you're much more of an expert than me.
A lot of
Helps us.
effects, I think, a lot of reverb and delays,
Is it this?
phasing and flanging does take you to a different world. And I don't think
Mm.
it's any coincidence that like the Flaming Lips were influenced by it. I mean, type of records that they do that are, like set on other planets and fighting robots, and you know what I mean. It's like can absolutely it fits into it fits into their universe, doesn't it?
So the concept is man goes into the future. It's not clear how he gets there. We assume it's some kind of wormhole or he's built a time machine. It's not really made clear. But the album starts with this prologue, and you get this heavily roboticized voice
Yeah, it's
doing.
vocoder.
Yeah, and it's a throwback to the El Dorado album, because that album in
Yeah.
1974 was also a kind of journey into a fantasy land, and it begins with a spoken word, a
Mm,
person intoning this thing, and I think it ends with that as well. And this album also starts with a prologue and an epilogue, so it's clearly Jeff Lynne, sort of. He seems to like this kind of epic voyage
mm,
sort of
mm,
motif.
mm, mm.
That goes out into Twilight, which begins with this huge flourish of synthesizers. It's a real sort of show opener, isn't it?
Oh
And
yeah,
and
yeah.
then Bev Bevan does this. I mean, it blew my mind when I was a
Doodloom,
teenager.
doom, doodloom, doom, doodloom.
Yeah, sort of heavily phased, sort of big,
Doom,
huge
doom,
tom
tsh, doom,
toms,
doom. Yeah, it just
and
comes
then
in just like
yeah,
huge. The vocoder, I think, sounds amazing. It sounds like the Cylons out of like Battlestar Galactica in that
yeah,
sort of time. I think it's a Roland vocoder. It might be, I think, or a Korg. But Roland had this really iconic vocoder that was used on Kraftwerk and stuff like that. So I think it might be that one, but it just sounds brilliant. It's really kind of
mm,
juicy and just sounds very robotic. And then it goes, you hear a kind of laugh, ha, 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 kind of like Wizard of Oz. I think Jeff Lynne's got a big thing about Wizard of Oz, hasn't he? It's almost like the kind of the bit in the Wizard of Oz where they're going to the cyclone and they're kind of going off into Oz. It's like that almost. And then when it comes in with that synth riff, it's just like, we've arrived. I just love that beginning. I don't think there's a better
yeah,
beginning to an ELO album. I think it's just fantastic. From the moment I heard that, the albums that came afterwards, I was waiting for like that moment again, and it never really quite came in the albums that followed. Secret Messages nearly got there, but it not quite. It just never really got it back after that because it was just such a brilliant opening that,
Mm,
yeah, I think it sort of stands out for me.
mm. Yeah, I mean, it was a single as well. I mean, obviously, it's a song which has hit single written all over it. Just a quick mention for the interludes. I think you mentioned them at the beginning, didn't you? The interludes on this record.
Mm,
We get the first one after Twilight. It goes into this. It's a female voice singing this strange sort of lonely melody. Um,
mm,
Jeff Lynne could do that. He did that a lot on the early albums. On the third day, he was really good at doing these sort of strange,
mm.
sort of abstract interludes, which it's difficult to
Discordant almost, isn't it?
almost
Like or
discordant.
something.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely. Not
yeah.
not really what you expect from ELO. And then it goes into yours truly 2095, which is the sort of
Mm.
I'm in love with a robot song, which Trevor Horn had
Yes.
done it already on The Age of
Yeah,
Plastic.
done it with "I Love You, Miss Robot." Yeah, and obviously you got Computer Love, Kraftwerk, and it
Yeah.
still goes on. I think Felix de Housecat did a track about 15 years ago called "Watching Cars Go By," all about robot love companion. So it's still very much a kind of theme of sci-fi.
Well, this is the concept that I've written down here. I didn't know this word. Have you heard of this word before? Gynoid.
No,
Gynoid. Gynoid. So I got
sounds
this.
like something like medical.
Apparently, it's the word. It must be a newish word. It's a word for a female android, essentially.
Oh right,
And
okay.
it's become a motif or a trope, or whatever you want to call
Mm,
it. As you
yeah,
say
yeah,
in cyberpunk literature or whatever. And this must be quite an early example of it. But as you say, J.G. Ballard and via the Buggles, etc. I suppose
yeah.
you
Philip
could
K.
say
Dick,
Philip
very
K.
very
Dick,
big as well.
absolutely,
All
yeah.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you could say even by 1981, this song is maybe a little bit kind of what's the word? It's sort of slightly derivative of other things, I suppose.
Mm.
I can imagine people listening to it who were maybe a bit older than us at the time and going, "Oh, do we need another one of these 'I'm in love with you, Miss Robot' kind of songs?"
When it gets into the second part of the song, it just really takes off, and I just think it's a really cracking record.
Yeah. So then we move into Ticket to the Moon, which to my ears sounds
Mm,
like it could
mm,
almost have come from a previous album. It could have almost been on Discovery. It seems like a more traditional ELO
mm.
song compared to the first two, compared to Twilight and Yours Truly. This one it's a stately piano ballad, isn't it, with a string arrangement and
It
that
is,
kind
but
of
it's sort of it's got that futuristic theme, and I think it makes it different. It's not like singing about a standard romance, and it's about you know, going to the moon. I've got a ticket, and I'm going to satellite two, and all that kind of stuff. And it's all like it's set again in this world. It's like he thought, right, I'm going to write all my ballads and all my kind of slowies and my kind of my love loss tunes, but I'm going to make it so that it's all about set in the future and kind of rockets and stuff. And again, it just sort of fits beautifully into the album, I think, as well. And I only picked up on this sort of years later was that there is a theme. There's a mention of like I've got flight leaves here today from Satellite 2, isn't there?
yeah,
Lyric, and then in Here Is the News, like somebody has broken out of Satellite 2. So I
yeah,
think, oh, it's the guy. He's like, I'm not going on the ticket to the moon. I'm going to go back to see the one I love, sort of thing.
yeah.
So he's broken out of it and he's gone, right, sod you. I'm going to go back and
So we didn't
so
mention before, did we, that this theme that this guy is trapped in the future, but he wants to get back to 1981,
mm,
and he started a love affair with an android, presumably because he's missing his actual girlfriend back at home, kind of thing.
mm, mm,
And it's in the next song, which I think is a brilliant song, "The Way Life's Meant to
mm.
Be," that it really
Oh
sort of
yeah,
it really crystallizes it, doesn't it? When he starts to
it
sing about
does. Yeah,
with its ivory towers and its plastic flowers. I wish I was back in
yeah,
1981.
yeah.
And he's wandering around a town where he used to live, and it's all futuristic, and he sort of recognizes where he is, but it's very disorientating. Musically,
Um,
this song is brilliant. It's got a sort of castanet part in it, and it's quite sort of Phil Spector. It's got this
yes, it
really
is.
big,
Yeah, yeah,
powerful,
yeah.
really great
Boom,
acoustic
boom. Big
guitars,
sort of, like bombastic kind of
kettle
timpanis and
drums.
stuff in there. Yeah, kettle drums and
I've
stuff.
heard a busker playing this song, and
Oh, have you?
I have
I hope
amazingly,
you gave
yeah.
him. I hope you gave him a really good tip.
I think I probably did, yeah. But I mean, again, it's a song which, even though you've got the huge production, when you strip it down, like most Jeff Lynne songs, you know, it could work. It could work as a more stripped down thing. This is just a sort of, it's a guitar song. You know, it's quite a basic song, and even
Mm,
though
mm,
he sort of inflates everything with the production, but you know, it's not like Yes or sort of you know, very serious prog music with strange time
mm,
signatures and
mm.
weird chord
No,
progressions.
no, no.
It's sort of Beatles, Spectre, maybe Beach Boys as
Yeah.
well, actually. And then the side ends with an instrumental, which I know some ELO fans have said this track, Another Heart Breaks, shouldn't have been on the album, and he should have instead
Oh,
he should have used Julie Don't Live Here Anymore, which
I know.
is
Yeah, absolutely wrong. This is so great. This is one of my favorite. When I was a kid, this is one of my favorite tracks on
yeah,
the album. It's so otherworldly and strange, and it could be off any kind of experimental kind of electronic act. I mean, I just think it's brilliant. It just sort of, the fact is, he just says another heartbreak. I love it when the counting comes in. He's got this voice going one, two, and it's like it's just quite ominous, and
it is,
the
yeah.
the the the, the chords in it are quite strange, and
Mm.
yeah, for me again, it just was sounded futuristic, and I think it's perfect. I think we'll come back to that about the B sides. I'm glad they're B sides. I think they're
Yeah.
good tracks, and I only heard them many many years later, so that might be why I don't want them in the album. But for me, the set list that you got there on the album, the track list is
Mm.
is ideal, and you shouldn't have any of those other tracks on it. It'll spoil it.
Okay, so moving on to side two. Now,
Mm.
I seem to remember when I first heard this album that side one really, really knocked me out, and side two was
Mm, mm.
sort of more of a grower. Really, it seemed like
Yeah,
maybe not quite as many hooks, not quite as many immediate moments, more of a um, yeah, just more of a grower. What's your take on that?
I think you're right. I think there's for me when I was little, there was one major standout track, and that was "Here Is the News." Was like just kind of again just went whoa, here we go. Hold On Tight obviously was really great as well, and became a single. But yeah, I think you're right. Became more of a grower, but
Mm,
um, it still continued that kind of vibe and that atmosphere of the future. And I mean, even the track like "Rain Is Falling," which is quite a I mean a Jeff Lynne song about rain, I mean, it's a really great song. But then he's got like a verse in it with with their brand new time transporter, kind of really kind of jolts you out of it. It's like, oh,
yeah.
so this is from this album.
This is the first song on side two, Rain is Falling, and it is a big sort of
Mm.
ELO ballad. It's almost, you can almost say it's a sort of a cousin to something like Big Wheels or Summer and Lightning.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
It's maybe not quite as melodic as that, but it's definitely got that quality to it, that kind of yearning quality. There's quite a funny story attached to this. When this album came out, Jeff Lynne went on the interview circuit in America, and he did an interview with this guy called Jim Ladd, who was quite a big DJ back in the 80s. He was a really famous
Mm,
American DJ. And Jim Ladd tried to talk to Jeff about the album and tried to get him to explain the concept of it. And
mm,
he
mm.
tried to go with him like track by track. He was used to talking to people like Roger Waters and Peter Gabriel, you know, these great sort of conceptual artists who were really able to kind
Yes.
of talk about their work and explain.
Mm,
And it got to
mm.
Rain is Falling, and Jeff was being really reluctant all the way through the interview and not really giving anything away. But Jim Ladd kept trying, and it got to Rain is Falling, and he said, "So what's this one all about?" And Jeff just said, "It's just about some guy just just looking out of his window, essentially." And Jim Ladd sort of lost his rag with him a little bit and said, "Look, Jeff, you need to give me something more." And Jeff sort of lost his rag back a little bit and just had to stop the
Mm.
interview almost. And he sort of stopped him and just said, "Look, I think I think you misunderstood something with all this. These are just songs. It might seem from listening to the music that I've got this like really, really in-depth concept in my mind, but he didn't. He didn't really. He was just
Yeah.
writing song, and
Mm,
he dreamt up this sort of loose concept. I found that quite
mm,
endearing. The idea that a song like "Rain Is Falling," you could mistakenly think that it is just some very deep and meaningful and big, momentous thing. But in Jeff's mind, it's just another ELO song where a guy's looking out of the window, being a little bit kind of, melancholy.
I think I mean, we're reading, like when I was doing research for this, like I was looking into, oh, that's I didn't have as much about the story that a lot of people have read into it. And I think it's
Yeah,
like Sergeant Pepper. People think, oh, it's a huge concept album, but there's only like Sergeant Pepper and maybe one or two of the tracks, and then the reprise, and
yeah.
then that was it. And then it was a concept album, but it was
Yeah.
and people read into it what it all how it's stitched together. But it's more about the kind of atmosphere and the feeling of it and the kind of the
Mm.
vibe. I think that's more the
Yeah.
concept, isn't it?
I think this sort of applies to the next couple of tracks because I think from the
Mm,
end of the world and the lights go down, I think in
mm,
particular they seem like the album maybe not at its weakest, but maybe at its
mm.
least conceptual. I mean, from the end of the world, it's like a sort of electro disco. It's got a real throbbing kind of
I was going to say
pulsating sound to it.
I really like this track, and I love the beginning. I love that bit of backwards orchestra that they've got coming in. Really great. I just love that. And the drums are very kind of electro disco sort of drums stuff on them. I mean, the lyrics are sort of slightly kind of futuristic from the end of the world, and all that kind of stuff. And sending a letter from, where he's maybe in the future, looking back, he's right stood at the end of the world, that sort of thing. So it's a bit sort of time travel-y, but I really liked it. I quite like the sort of
Mm.
skippiness. It's really skippy. It's a really skippy track, I think. I do enjoy it. I think Lights Go Down is it's fun, but it's not my favorite track on there, I think. I think that's where,
Yeah, I mean, the lights go down. It's almost like a sort of late night cabaret bar kind of. I always envisaged it as the point in the story where
Yes. Yeah.
he finally finds some little sort of cabaret bar somewhere where he can just basically drown his sorrows. And there's maybe like a
You really
little
have read more into it than I
absolutely,
have as
yeah.
well.
And there's maybe like a little bar band playing, but they're sort of robots probably, and he's just sort of there, drinking. But it's got just a really nice sort of late night, sort of, quite to sort of relaxed vibe to it. But
Yeah,
so
I don't
sad
know.
though, such a sad song. One day I got to get out of here. I got to make everything clear. I've got to see you. I know the way I feel is wrong, so
Mm.
wrong, but I got to carry on when you ain't around. So again, I suppose actually I'm wrong really. I think this is the part of the album where he's missing his girlfriend again, and it's bringing it down to a sort of human level again before you
Yeah.
get into the real kind of techno flash of
Yes.
Here Is the
Yeah.
News, which is probably apart from Twilight is the other big huge futuristic moment on the
Yeah.
album, isn't it?
Yeah. Funny, I watched the videos tonight for the first time. I remember
Um,
watching the Hold On Tight video on Top of the
mm,
Pops and having the motorbike, crash through the wall and stuff. But
yeah.
I'd never seen the other videos, and it's sort of so
Mm.
weird seeing them because it's like, oh wow, here is the news. It's all like, they're all like kind of on phones and kind of reading the news and very, very early 80s. It's kind of, it
Yeah,
almost looks like a Buggles video, actually. It reminds me of a lot of
yeah,
that. But and you got Ticket to the Moon, which is very lasers, lots of
yeah.
lasers in it and stuff. Here is the news. It's just a absolute belter, and I think it's been used in quite a few sort of documentaries and things when they need a bit about the news is happening. Go, here is the news. I think it very much kind of it was obviously Jeff Lynne channeling. If he's been in America, seeing at the time probably the only sort of 24-hour news channel was probably CNN at the time, and just kind of foreshadowing kind of 24-hour news. He probably thought, yeah, this is probably what's going to happen in the future. It's just going to be 24-hour
Mm,
news all the time, and it's kind of what it is like, except
yeah.
it's not probably on TV. It's on like Twitter and
Mm. Well, it's a great concept for a song, isn't it? A song called
yeah.
"Here Is the News," set in the future, which basically contains a kind of montage of news broadcasts and news flashes, but it's all
Mhm.
futuristic news. Like you say, it's somebody's broken out of satellite two. The song that it reminds me of, and not the song, but the recording that it reminds me of, it's a sort of updating of I Am the Walrus, I always think, because that ends with
Yeah,
the sort
yeah,
of, with
yeah,
the radio tuning and just those kind of sounds. In fact, you do hear a
yeah,
sort of
yeah.
a very George Harrison-y voice in this song saying, I'd
Mm.
like to say hello to everybody. And for years, I thought
Ah.
that actually was George Harrison, but I don't think it is. I think it's just Jeff Lynne doing the
Yeah,
voice. It's sort of
yeah, all the kind of
Merseyside.
radio sounds. Yeah, you're right. It is really like that. I mean, it's a great track though, and again, it's sort of it's like that. It's sort of like a panic, isn't it? It's like a panic. It's kind of urgency and panic and kind of it's great.
Yeah, in fact, that sort of links it back to the Buggles as well. I'm thinking of, songs like Johnny on the Monorail at the end of The Age of
Yes,
Plastic. That also has a sort of panicked, like a sense of being on the
yes.
run. And this thing about him breaking out of Satellite 2, it really reminds me of like a film like Logan's Run or something like
Yes,
that. One of
yeah,
those great
yeah,
sort of
yeah,
1970s sort of dystopian
yeah,
sci-fi,
yeah, definitely.
or even Sleeper, with Woody
Yeah,
Allen, almost like a sort of like a caper. It's the part of the film or the album where he's desperately trying to escape. He's probably
yeah,
got
and he escapes
androids
and
chasing him down
yeah,
corridors,
exactly.
and yeah. I mean, the album doesn't really. I mean, the story doesn't really conclude, does it? I mean,
No,
there's a bit of
no.
a cop out. 21st Century Man, I think, is just got the most gorgeous melody. I mean, it's always been one of my
Oh, it
favorite
used to
ELO
really make
songs.
me feel sad when I was quite
Yeah,
little. I'd listen to it and like be like,
yeah,
oh, like almost in tears, listen to it, like this
yeah,
poor person, and
yeah.
like it just because it's such a beautiful
It
song.
is.
It's
Yeah.
it's really and I love the way it comes back in the epilogue as well. I just think it's just beautiful. That
Yeah,
it's
it's
really
very
nice.
sort
But
of
it's
Abbey Road side too, isn't it? The way it comes back in a sort of,
yes, yeah,
and just
yeah,
that,
definitely.
just the lyrics there. Jeff is, he can be such a genius really with lyrics. Though you ride on the wheels of tomorrow, you still wander the fields of your sorrow. I mean, it's pretty powerful stuff, isn't it? He always manages to produce it in a way which makes it sound totally momentous. That's the thing about a lot of those ELO songs. Songs like Shangri-La from a New World Record, which ends with this
Mm.
voice going, "One day I will return to Shangri-La," with all this sort of reverb on it, just sort of stretching off into the
Yeah,
distance. It's just
yeah,
absolutely immense.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and I suppose this song, it's sort of, I sort of see it as the end of the album, really, because "Hold On Tight," which is the hit single which comes on at the end, it's sort of a bit of a cop out, isn't it? It's a sort of
It's a bit tacked on, isn't
1950s.
it? If it
It's
as a
tacked on.
concept sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it does feel a
But I
bit
think
tacked on.
that's where the epilogue is quite nice because it sort of ties it back to yeah, there's this time travel thing, isn't there? It's quite nice, because I mean the way that it goes, from 21st Century Man, and then they start singing time over and over again, and
Mm.
then it starts going into that kind of strange, again, all those backward sounds and stuff, which again links back to the beginning of the album where you start hearing them and stuff. So it's got that kind of, circular thing that you have in, Dark Side of the Moon or something like that.
Well, I wonder whether what you're meant to read into the album at the end is that it's him basically finally traveling back to 1981 because he's escaped from
Yeah,
Satellite 2 and here is the
yeah,
news.
exactly. He's holding on to his dream, of getting back with his
Yeah. And
missus, and
actually
then he's
in 21st Century Man it says you stepped out of a dream believing everything was gone. Return with what you've learned, they'll kiss the ground you walk upon. So there is
mm.
this, I think there's this slight sort of, you're meant to think, yeah, he is going back, and that, I suppose that's the Wizard of Oz thing again, isn't it? Which you said before,
Yeah,
he's got this thing about travelers returning, and
yeah,
that
yeah,
was very strong
yeah,
in El
exactly.
Dorado as well. I
Yeah,
love the way that the
definitely.
album ends, where it just it does a kind of like a tape snip, doesn't it? It builds
Yeah,
and just cuts.
yeah, just
Um,
dead stop. Yeah,
yeah,
it's great.
brilliant.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but yeah, I
yeah.
mean, and Hold On Tight was great. I remember uh, in my village there was a bus shelter where all the kind of the hard kids would hang out.
All
There used
the
to be, I used
ELO
to,
fans.
well, this is it because I used to think, oh, then they'll, I used to go into the bush shelter when they went there earlier on in the day with
Yeah.
some of my friends, and there was carved into the wood of the bush shelter there'd be like AC/DC and
Mm,
Motorhead and
yeah,
lots of those kind of 70s 80s. They're obviously like rock fans
yeah.
with the kids. But then when this came out, there was a little score in the top at the top with someone had scored ELO. I was like,
Brilliant,
wow,
brilliant. It,
ELO are cool enough to be in the gang. So yeah, I mean
great
it's
story. I love that kind of thing. Yeah, yeah.
it because it was a big hit for them. Did it get to? It was top 10, wasn't it? Was it?
It was number one.
Was it number one?
It's number
Wow.
one, but just for 2 weeks. It was a big TV advert which said something like, it's time for ELO or something. Because they'd not made
Mm,
an album. If you don't count Xanadu, they hadn't done an album since 1978. And
mm,
they hadn't toured. This is the other thing. They hadn't done any touring at all. So it did
mm.
sort of feel like a comeback. And of course, they did do a tour off the back of this album. They did a tour of, I think it was Europe and America. They had a sort of R2D2 robot on stage that did all the sort of all the robotic things. But ticket sales were down though. That tour,
Mm.
it was clear that they were on
I might
the.
have to see that. There must be some YouTube stuff of that.
There's no video of it, but there's audio. There's audio
Oh,
footage of
right,
it, and there's
okay,
quite a few,
okay.
photographs. They had a sort of futuristic backdrop behind them of, sort of buildings. On the album jacket, on the inner sleeve, they're
Yeah,
photographed
yeah.
looking up. This building here, apparently, this is, I think it's a bank in Munich near the studios where they
Right.
worked. So I think it's meant to represent some kind of futuristic, you know,
Yeah,
cityscape.
yeah.
But they had this on the stage behind them as a huge projection. Maybe we should just finish with a quote from Jeff here. So when asked whether the man's experiences, so the hero of the
Mm.
album, whether his experiences had been a dream all along, he responded, "This is what I'd like to know. It's baffled me since I wrote it, if he has actually gone to the future or if he's just thinking about it. It could be real, it could be a dream. I'm not sure. I'd rather not say because I don't know." So in Jeff's mind, it wasn't even necessarily this is actually all happening. This could just be a
Mm.
dream and just leave it at that.
It's just
Why?
enjoyable nonsense, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah,
that's that's at the end of the day. It's not meant to be, you know,
no,
poured over and kind of, I
yeah,
can't wait to, examine the lyrics and work out where the guy's gone back in time. And, I don't think it's meant to be, that
yeah,
kind of album really. Not like the sort of some other kind of concept albums where people sort
yeah,
of dive into them and get lost for years and never come out. It's a really fun kind of themed futuristic time travel
yeah,
kind of concept album, but it's light, it's fun, frothy, poppy, and a
yeah,
bit of prog thrown in as well. Just that I hope that eventually people will kind of
yeah.
will when it comes up will include it in their 101 albums of 1981.
Yeah,
I know that Electronic Sounds do regret missing it out, and it's
yeah,
easily done. But I would like to think that it would be kind of included in there, and because it has influenced bands, to like Flaming Lips and Daft Punk, and I've heard it sampled on Future Sound of London and other tracks as well, and it's like,
mm,
it's definitely of. But I'm sure that Orbital know about it. You know what I mean?
yeah,
I'm sure
yeah.
bands like that know of this album.
Good stuff. All right. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. Let us know what you think of this album. If you haven't heard it, make sure
Thank
you
you.
rectify that at the earliest opportunity. And we'll see you soon. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Cheers.